This video is brought to you by Skillshare. One of the most popular Doctor Who episodes is The Waters of Mars, written by Russell T Davies and Phil Ford as the 10th Doctor's penultimate story. Pretty much every Doctor Who fan loves this episode, and for very good reason. Initially, it was going to be a Christmas special titled Red Christmas, but ultimately aired as more of a Halloween special with the cast facing off against a monstrous flood. Inspired by NASA discovering traces of water on the planet, these villains would be water-based, along with Davies being enthusiastic with the idea of setting a story at a point in history most children watching would actually live to experience. This led to the setting of 2059, chronicling the doomed first base of Mars as the Doctor grapples with the foreknowledge of events, just like he had done in Fires of Pompeii the year before. This aspect of the story is the source for most fans' love for the episode, but everywhere you look there is something incredible about this nightmarish special. So keep away from the water and try to hold back your urge to smash Gadget into little pieces, because it's time to dive into The Waters of Mars.
That's who I am. A Time Lord victorious.
But before we begin, I'd just like to take a minute to tell you about Skillshare. Skillshare is a wonderful online service offering thousands of unique hands-on classes with short lessons flexible for any schedule. People are born to create, so whether you're looking to learn new skills or you want to get better in your existing ones, Skillshare will help you achieve personal and professional growth by creating real projects alongside a community of millions. There are no ads and a constant flow of Skillshare original classes, so there's plenty of inspiration for things like photography, creative writing and digital art. A lot of people ask what editing software I use, which is Premiere Pro. However, it's a bit of a tough program to get used to. But the class Learn Premiere Pro and Edit a How-To Video for Beginners by Helez Narvez serves as a great introduction to Premiere, teaching you the basics and fundamentals so you can learn by doing. When I first started, I wish I had had something like this to get me going. So I really recommend this class if you want to learn Premiere Pro, pretty much the go-to editing software for the industry. You can access this class along with so many more by joining Skillshare, and just between you and me, the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial, so you can start exploring your creativity today. And again, a big thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get on with the review.
Anything I do just makes it happen.
To begin with, Mars is a great setting for this episode. I do find it quite surprising that it took this long for a TV episode to be properly set there, since Pyramids of Mars was mainly just a single room. The red planet honestly looks great. Sure, deep down you know it's just another Welsh quarry, but the colour is brilliant and it genuinely looks like the real deal. You could say it's cliche to have an episode about Mars, but there's a simple reason why it attracts so many sci-fi stories. Even though Venus is our sister planet, Mars is usually tied very closely to Earth, because of the idea that we can explore and conquer it, since it's the only other remotely habitable planet in the solar system. It's more interesting than the moon, and it's closer to home than Jupiter's moons or Titan, so I really don't blame Doctor Who for setting its sights on such a classic setting for a more domestic space storyline. The base itself also looks fantastic. The production team were conscious about how quickly dated futuristic sets can become, so they decided to use NASA's sleek, white, yet industrial designs as inspiration, along with keeping the story in our near future. There's also a persistent mechanical humming in the background the entire time, ambience which adds so much to the atmosphere by injecting realism into almost every scene. Even the spacesuits retain the iconic NASA bulkiness we know and love, so it all feels suitably familiar and within the audience's understanding, not getting too carried away by making everything ultra futuristic. However, just as the Doctor arrives on the planet, he is accosted by the realistically multinational crew of Bowie Base 1, which gives us this delightful little moment.
State your name, rank and intention.
The Doctor. Fun.
I always like when characters react this way to the Doctor's bringing up. After all, this is only 2059. It still takes a while to travel to Mars, so him suddenly appearing would be alarming to the only people currently there. This confrontation also leads to the chilling reveal that all these people are going to die on this exact day. This is a typical paradox that hadn't really been thoroughly explored before. Sure, the Doctor has been into the past and had to let massacres and eruptions happen to maintain the course of history, but this time he has specific names and faces tied to events. It's such a haunting scene, but it's also an incredibly cheeky way of establishing characters for the audience to put names to faces. The scene is literally just the Doctor running through who the crew are, but the inclusion of their obituaries make it a tense and dramatic moment, highlighting the biggest problem of time travel travel and setting up the driving force of the story, which is the Doctor's huge dilemma. They're used to showing up in random places and saving people from monsters, but this time he knows he can't change it, which means he has to fight his own sense of purpose.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry with all of my heart. But it's one of those very rare times when I've got no choice.
It's a fascinating concept for a story. We had previously seen it in Fires of Pompeii, but this time it's a lot more significant because it's hard-coded into the universe that these people have to die, and there isn't a companion like Donna there to help him. He's on his own. Well, actually he has Adelaide Brooke, the stern and pragmatic commander of the mission, who forces him to stay because, naturally, he's very suspicious. Adelaide is a really good one-off companion. Like Donna, she's an older character with a personality that simultaneously contrasts and complements the Doctor's. She doesn't hold him up on some kind of pedestal like a lot of other companions do. She takes him for what he is and always questions his judgment and motives because she doesn't know him. It's a credit to her as a character that she maintains her own independence, since it would be risky to put so much faith in such a mysterious stranger who doesn't make any sense. Adelaide is shown to be a very firm leader who the majority of her team respects. She can be a bit overly authoritative at times, but that's simply because they need to stick to the book in such a hostile environment. This serves as a good mirror to the Doctor's own recklessness in the face of danger, so it gives you two very different sides. Adelaide is ambitious and driven, always wanting more out of life, like a typical companion, but the difference is she's not easily impressed by cheap tricks and suave monologues. She picks up on the small things and challenges the Doctor on them, so it shows you that she's a different type of character who pays attention a lot more. I just really like Adelaide. She's a strong lead written well, with a sympathetic family link back to Earth, and an interesting journey over the course of the episode with a perfect payoff. Lindsay Duncan plays off David Tennant really well, and it's a huge shame she was only a one-off companion, since I would have loved to see more of the Doctor and Adelaide. On the opposite side of the spectrum though, Gadget is extremely annoying. It does have a lot of narrative importance, but it seems like an unnecessary quirk for it to have a catchphrase and everything. They even go as far as poking fun of it in the episode itself.
Does it have to keep saying that?
I think it's funny.
I hate funny robots.
A big problem with settling on Mars is food, or, well, a lack of it. The planet is all dust and sand, you can't grow any crops or keep any livestock, so it's an uphill battle to maintain a supply of food. This is why biodomes are an important part of any Mars base. Rather than waiting for the planet to be terraformed over the course of centuries, you can just build an airtight dome where you use Earth soil to grow food and plants. Indeed, Andrew has grown some carrots, but it soon turns out veg is actually bad for you as he suddenly becomes a monster. Remember that, stay away from carrots. I find it strange that this moment wasn't the cold open, since instead it was an awkwardly anticlimactic shot of the Doctor being held up by Gadget. I feel like this moment would have been more in line with the cold opens of the era, but I digress. The sudden appearance of the monster forces the Doctor to stick around, as the team come across the monstrous Andy in a really creepy sequence inside the biodome. I know it's been said before by every fan ever, but the Flood are incredible monsters. They're such a sinister yet simple design. They're still human apart from the eyes, mouths and the torrents of water gushing out of them. I've had my issues in the past with human-based monsters, but this is an example of the perfect use for them. The familiarity is what makes them creepy. Since they're simply vessels for this alien parasite, it also makes perfect sense to turn water itself into a Doctor Who villain. Like the Doctor says,
water always wins.
Even if it's over the course of centuries, water always chips away, eroding rock as it slowly encroaches on land. Boiling that down to its core concept creates a Doctor Who monster that cannot be stopped in any conventional way. You can run from the Flood, you can lock them out, but they'll never stop coming. It's more than just a simple zombie apocalypse. All they need to do is hit you with one single drop of water and you're dead. Something that seems so trivial and inconsequential becomes a life-threatening prospect, which, as we all know, is what Doctor Who has always excelled at doing.
Don't drink the water. Don't even touch it. Not one drop.
After temporarily seeing the Flood in the biodome tunnel, the Doctor and Adelaide examine Maggie, who has also become infected. It's here that we discover the Flood's motive. You see, Earth is mainly water, so if you're a viral pathogen living within Mars's water, where better to go than Earth? To infest all those oceans and lakes, to infect billions of people who themselves are mostly water. We always get monsters wanting to take over the planet, but this is completely different. A new scale and threat unlike anything else. As I said, all it takes is a single drop and the entire planet will be wiped out. They're not just called the Flood because they're made of water, they're just unstoppable, coming wave after wave and never tiring. They can even communicate with each other and coordinate, so they're an organised threat despite seemingly just being a zombie-like horde. I also like the reveal that the Flood was in the glacier being used for water, with the Doctor speculating that the native ice warriors must have found it and frozen it out of fear since you can't kill it. It's really nice that the Ice Warriors are mentioned in this story. After all, it had long been established that they came from Mars, so it makes a lot of sense that they also would have encountered the Flood in the same way we become plagued by pathogens and viral diseases on our own home planet. This backstory would go on to form the basis for the 12th Doctor comic The Wolves of Winter, but as it stands, the mere mention of the Ice Warriors is some good world building for Waters of Mars, just making the universe feel more fleshed out and connected, since you can't have a Mars story without at least mentioning the iconic Doctor Who monsters who come from the Red Planet itself. The scene above the glacier also gives us Adelaide's backstory, which is also good world building by Davis. It turns out that as a child she had a close encounter with Dalek all the way back in 2008, during the events of the Stolen Earth, in which her parents were one of the many casualties. I love how the stories from this era have actual narrative importance and consequences after they finish. It's hard to truly forget Planets in the Sky even with unit cover-ups. It was briefly mentioned in Planet of the Dead, but this is much more significant. Even though this is set decades after that story, you have characters who, like a lot of the audience, would have been children when the Earth was stolen, so using that as a part of Adelaide's inspiration for becoming an astronaut is an absolutely genius, wonderful way to maintain cohesion.
I saw the Daleks.
I also think in a way it shows how inspiring Doctor Who itself is. You get so many actors, writers and scientists who pursued their careers because they grew up with Doctor Who. So Adelaide having a similar path is almost a reflection of that effect the show has on young people. I also don't mind that the Doctor calls her one of the most important people in history. Usually I hate when Doctor Who makes companions absolutely crucial to the universe, but it works suitably here because Adelaide is just a one-time character. It almost makes the story a futuristic celebrity historical in a way.
Began a journey that takes the human race all the way out to the stars. It begins with you.
Thanks to her work, her descendants are inspired and go on to become a family of trailblazing spacefarers spreading out among the stars. It's not Adelaide absorbing the time vortex to become a god or jumping into the Doctor's timeline. She merely inspires generations, which makes her important in a more gratifying and realistic way. The scene is quite emotional as a result, especially because we, like the Doctor, know she dies here on this day, so she'll never be able to see her family again, or wave her daughter off in her first flight. It reminds you of the futility of this attempt at escaping, because their deaths are a fixed point in time the Doctor cannot alter.
Oh, I really should go.
Since they have no way of beating the Flood, the crew have no alternative but to flee in their escape rocket. And I adore the frenzy sequence as the Doctor stands there helplessly knowing they won't succeed. Like he established, water always wins. I think it's perfect that the track Valet plays as he forces himself to walk away. The same piece would later be used for his farewell tour before regenerating. So it being here is symbolic of how this single scene kickstarts that journey of becoming the Time Lord victorious and overstepping his bounds, setting up that final story. All of that began here, since he really should have just kept walking. You can see on his face the agony at dealing with this choice. The music again is great as the track Altering Lives plays while he reveals to Adelaide that they all die with Action 5. Even though we've known since the beginning, it's a heart-wrenching punch to the gut to actually hear the Doctor admit it to Adelaide herself. It just makes it feel real all of a sudden, reminding you of the extent of this situation.
Your death is fixed in time forever.
It's such a crushing moment of remembering how confined we are to time itself. You can't change it, you can't alter lives, no matter how powerful you are. Adelaide needs to die to set so many events into motion. It's not like Pompeii, where the Doctor could get away with saving Caecilius, who in the end was just a minor footnote in history. Adelaide is one of the most important people in all of human history, so you really can't change that. It's truly harrowing as the Doctor has to stand there in the airlock, listening to the panic of the crew as the water finally starts to break into the base. It reminds you that he wants to help, he really does, but there's nothing he can do. It's the ultimate torture for any well-intentioned time traveller. Not only do you know they can't be saved, but you have to actually listen to it play out in front of you. Steffi's death is especially heartbreaking. Even though we've barely spent any time with this character, we've seen the others watching video messages from home, so all it takes is for her to watch a single short clip from her children and it makes you tear up. To be trapped in that room with no way out and the water flooding at you would be more terrifying than any Dalek. At least with a Dalek you would just die, but the flood takes your body, it consumes you and puppets your corpse, which is a terrifying prospect, and she just has to stand there waiting for it to claim her. I do like that all the dominoes start to fall rapidly as the Doctor is walking away. Steffi, Roman and Ed all die in quick succession, which further represents the hopelessness of his situation. This was always going to happen. They were always going to try and escape, only to fall one by one and resort to blowing up the base once they couldn't reach their rocket. He knew this exact sequence of events, so he knows what's coming each time.
I should go. I really should go.
It's a really crushing and emotional sequence, the music crescendoing with the destruction of the rocket, seeing the three survivors desperately holding on as the Doctor recalls the death of the Time Lords. He's finally had enough. He's bound himself to the code of a species that no longer exists. The Time Lords were sealed away in another universe and wiped out. He knows because he did it himself. Why should he continue to live as a slave to this non-interference policy when he could save so many lives, destroy so many oppressive empires? This is a single moment where he becomes the Time Lord victorious. It has been building throughout the 10th Doctor era as he has had to deal with losing everything. He has seen the Master meddle with time for fun, whilst he suffers and has to watch people around him dying in his name. I think it's the perfect payoff to this simmering storyline of loss and helplessness. He could have saved so many people by disregarding fixed points, but he has always stayed true to his morals. But in the end, where has that gotten him? Without the Time Lords, there's no longer that need to maintain their stance on meddling. They can't punish him anymore. It's entirely understandable for the story to culminate in this way, since we know the significance of this change of hearts. We've seen the consequences of averting fixed points before, so it's not a light decision to make, and it shows how much torment the Doctor has had to go through before finally snapping. I actually don't mind that the Reapers are missing from this story. Back in Father's Day they appeared after Rose saved her dad, but if you watch carefully, it's not immediate. Therefore you can easily assume that Adelaide's proper death prevents them from ever showing up, because the course of history is fixed immediately. Sure, it's just headcanon, but I think it's a good answer to a potential plot hole many people have often criticised.
She takes your people out into the galaxy because you die.
I've spoken throughout about incredible scenes, but by far the best shots of this episode come when the Doctor returns to save the last three crew members. You get all the strange creatures kicking in, alarms blaring, and it feels triumphant, the Doctor doing what they do best. He's like a changed man, confident that he won't die here because of Carmen's prophecy in the previous episode.
He will knock 4 times.
There's a frenzied desperation to him we've never seen before. This is an uncaged Doctor, the Doctor who doesn't have to worry about treading on any toes. As he says in this powerful moment which has been memed to death,
The laws of time are mine, and they will obey me!
you even see how time is desperately trying to fix itself, throwing everything it can at the Doctor to maintain the course of history. It's again symbolic of the ongoing struggle throughout the narrative, a personification of the battle between the Doctor and time. However, he refuses to be beaten. Even as the flood closes in and starts to unleash the glacier, the Doctor realises he can just pilot Gadget into the TARDIS and save them all. There's almost a bittersweet triumph to it. For once, you almost don't want the Doctor to succeed, since Adelaide is right to instigate Action 5, and the Doctor is wrong to rescue them from their fixed deaths. Even so, the music is fantastic and it feels satisfying to see the TARDIS appearing. It's quite similar to Fires of Pompeii, that glaring white light representing hope. Because at the end of the day, that's what the TARDIS is. That's what it has always been. No matter how dark the day is, how hopeless the situation, the TARDIS will always be something to hold on to. It's a really big climactic ending suitable for a special like this. I suppose you could see it all as a bit of a Deus Ex Machina, but Gadget has been present throughout the story, complete with the fast speed having been altered earlier. It's a good use of a previously minor part of the plot, a clever solution to the dilemma, remotely piloting the TARDIS to save the day, although you just know they were reluctant to do it because Davis famously claimed the set was impossible to film in HD due to it having been designed with that horrible standard definition in mind. After Bowie Base 1 has been destroyed and the flood contained once more, the episode suddenly takes a very dark turn, which is saying a lot considering the tone so far has already been grimmer than most Doctor Who stories. There's an overpowering silence as they leave the TARDIS. Nobody says anything, it's just an eerie quiet without any triumphant or emotional music. It's a brilliant choice by the team because it makes it so impactful, once again showing the weight of what the Doctor has just done. The viewer can take the moment to reflect on the implications of this daring rescue, since it wasn't supposed to happen at all. However, you can see the Doctor is maintaining his own sense of righteousness with one simple sentence.
Isn't anyone going to thank me?
We've heard lines like this before, but in more of a joking tone. This time though, it's genuine. He actually expects praise for this, which further deepens that creeping sense of dread at how much he has strayed from his own path. I mentioned it in my next Doctor review, but this change has been coming. The Doctor is usually all without witness or reward, but the 10th Doctor has slowly become more egocentric and prideful. You see it in that Christmas special, where he's soaking up the praise after saving London. I find it quite astonishing how a single sentence can change so much about an incarnation of the Doctor. Usually when this character saves people, they are thankful, but Mia's reaction says it all.
Who the hell are you?
The way he has conducted himself around them doesn't communicate the good nature of the Time Lord, so Mia represents that sudden momentous shift in the character's presentation. Even as a viewer, we almost don't recognise him anymore, so you really can't blame her for freaking out with this random guy showing up to save them in an impossible box and looking down on them afterwards.
No one should have that much power.
Tough.
It's then that we get the definitive moment of the episode, as Adelaide reflects on her survival, knowing the future itself is now in doubt. She had done everything to preserve it, safe in the knowledge that her daughter and other descendants would be inspired and shape the course of human history. But now that she survived, that might never happen. You don't need Reapers to communicate the consequences of her survival. This single scene says everything it needs to. She had accepted her death, but the Doctor has taken that away from her. He's basically become a villain, which is shown with the sinister music. This darker characterization is furthered when he dismisses people like Mia and Yuri as unimportant. This is an incarnation who has previously always said how important every single person is, no matter who they are. But now all of a sudden he disregards them and views them as lesser compared to Adelaide. You understand what he means by it, since Adelaide is factually more important than most people, but the way he says it is another massive betrayal of his morals and beliefs. It's what makes his declaration of being the Time Lord victorious even more chilling. Since you know he's completely uncaged now, he's willing to do this consistently from now on, no matter the consequences. It's been said before, but this is one of the most villainous, bad guy moments of the Doctor's long history. Kind of like him joining the dark side, to put it into Star Wars terms. Adelaide essentially speaks for the audience and time itself when she says,
And there's no one to stop you.
like I said earlier, the Time Lords used to be able to govern and stop this kind of disaster. They even forced the Second Doctor into regeneration and exile for much less, so it's indicative of how much power the Doctor now wields in their absence. It's the perfect end to the episode. Such an incredible scene in every sense. Adelaide is the ideal character for the moment, since she has always had this more skeptical view of the Doctor, which comes to fruition here when she challenges him for what he's done.
Little people? What, like Mia and Yuri? Who decides they're so unimportant? You?
Adelaide is a headstrong character with her own morals, like the Doctor themselves before this moment. Therefore, it's very in character for her to play by the rules of time in the same way she played by the book on her own mission, killing herself in order to preserve her death and ensure her family continue their legacy. The Doctor may have tried taking that away from her, but she still holds her life in her own hands, and I think it's an incredibly brave thing for her to do. What the Doctor did was objectively wrong, there's no way around that. You simply cannot change events that dramatically because it's not how the universe works. It breaks all fundamental laws of time and space and creates countless paradoxes. For Adelaide to reject this new lease of life is her accepting her place in the universe as it should have been. It takes a lot of mental strength to carry out such an action, because you're sacrificing your second chance, a life where you can grow old with the ones you love. The Doctor is usually the one to do this, to make that sacrifice, but he's lost his way, so it's up to Adelaide now. She's basically the only person left to save time itself. I think that's what the Doctor realises when he eventually decides to save Wilf at the cost of his own life. It's the responsibility he must bear all alone. The weight of Adelaide's sacrifice is again punctuated by Varley, as the Doctor finally realises how far he's gone, seeing that time did fix itself after all, but because of Adelaide, not him.
gone too far.
Before, he was so full of arrogance and confidence, but now he realises just how much he's betrayed his moral code. It's almost like he considers regenerating right then and there, just to start afresh and to rid himself of the Time Lord Victorious before he can do any more damage. It's such a sobering ending, this crisis of conscience and identity serving as the best lead-in for the end of time. Such an overt change in tone and characterisation that could only precede consequences of the most severe nature. It's no surprise that Waters of Mars is one of the most beloved and acclaimed episodes in Doctor Who history. I mean, it even won a Hugo Award in 2010 for Best Dramatic Presentation. It genuinely is phenomenal in every way. The setting of Mars is a no-brainer for the show, but it doesn't feel generic or overused, because the mystique and attraction of the Red Planet plays into the actual storyline. The Flood are a genius villain to face off against, a terrifying viral infection that weaponizes water itself, with a memorable design that definitely leaves an impression. The whole story is an exceptional exploration of fixed points in time and causality. Seeing how hard it is for a time traveller to stand by with the knowledge of the death around them, it feels like a realistic look at these concepts. The next step up from Father's Day and Fires of Pompeii by taking it to a new extreme. It creates the perfect stakes and atmosphere for a special, feeling almost like a proper movie with some unforgettable scenes throughout. Not that it was ever in doubt, but Waters of Mars easily gets an S rank on the tier list. It's a really powerful lead into the end of time, setting up that narrative really effectively. David Tennant and Lindsay Duncan are perfect together, with Adelaide and the Doctor serving as really good contrast in how they react to the adventure and its ultimate outcome. Waters of Mars is simply the perfect Doctor Who story. It has everything you could want from the show, and on top of that, it respects its audience, creating one of the best single hours of science fiction television. Obviously you'd expect nothing less from Graham Harper in the director's chair. And speaking of meddling with time, who knows how doomed the future will be if you don't hit that like button and subscribe right now. See what I did there? Okay, you've already clicked off. Great. And I'd like to thank my Platinum level patron Fallon Cortez, and all my Gold level patrons Alex Marston, Calvin, Daniel Shilato, Franz Horn aka Line Vortex, George, Herna Verzog, James Alea Waterhouse, John, and Stephen Never Miller. Thank you so much for your support.